Lecture 21, Empire and Nations. In this lecture, we will begin with Napoleon Bonaparte, who ended the French Revolution, and then, after declaring himself emperor, tried to turn France into a vast empire with Europe under its control. He did not succeed, and instead spent his dying days in exile on the South Atlantic island of St. Helena. Around the time of his death, a surge of nationalistic enthusiasm spread across Europe. We will study this phenomenon in Germany, Italy, and in post-Napoleonic France. Finally, we will conclude by becoming acquainted with the Catholic Austrian Empire's Prince Clemens Wenzel von Metternich. Metternich served as the foreign minister of the Holy Roman Empire before it was dissolved, and it was dissolved in response to his defeat by Napoleon in 1806. After the Holy Roman Emperor's collapse, Metternich became the chancellor of the Holy Roman Emperor's successor state, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. As we will see, he was wary of nationalism and feared that if unchecked, nationalistic ambitions could lead to war among competing nation-states. Napoleon's empire and the Catholic Church. During the French Revolution, Napoleon served as an artillery officer. A painting I include in your transcript is an 1812 painting by the French painter Jacques-Louis David, who realistically depicts Napoleon as emperor. In contrast, the 1801 painting that is also included in your transcript, also by David, glorifies Napoleon by painting him larger than the horse he is riding, crossing over the Alps into Spain. And on the bottom of the painting, you can read the names Bonaparte, Hannibal, and Carolus Magnus, or Charlemagne, that signified Napoleon as being their equal or even greater than these political leaders from the past. In anticipation of his greatness, Napoleon was rapidly promoted to brigadier general and eventually to supreme commander. Due to the French military's consistent success in battle, it became an institution that many French people identified with stability and hoped for a future less marked by frequent political change. Seizing on the admiration that France as a whole had for its military, Napoleon successfully staged a coup d'etat on November 9, 1799. The following month, he was named the first consul of France. And then, on December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. Napoleon's popularity remained high as long as he was successful in battle. However, when in 1812 he invaded Russia, as punishment for Russia's refusal to obey his continental system, his popularity quickly plummeted. Even though he technically defeated the Russians in battle, in a certain sense he lost, since so many French soldiers whom he led into battle died during the harsh Russian winter. Capitalizing on France's weakened state, Russia, along with Prussia, Austria, and England, in turn successfully invaded France and defeated France's military led by Napoleon. King Louis XVIII, the brother of King Louis XVI, who had been in exile for 23 years after his brother was decapitated during the French Revolution, was then called from his hiding in England to France to serve as the French king. From May of 1814, King Louis XVIII ruled as king. There was, though, a brief period of time during this reign when King Louis XVIII lost his power to Napoleon, who in 1814 escaped from the Mediterranean island of Elba, returned to France, raised an army, and ruled for about 100 days, until he was finally defeated by troops loyal to King Louis XVIII on June 18, 1815, during the Battle of Waterloo. After the battle, Napoleon once again was exiled, but to a different island, and this time this island is called St. Helena, where Napoleon received the last rites, the sacrament of anointing the sick, from Father Agne Vignali. We have some certainty, therefore, that Napoleon passed from this world into the next at peace with the Catholic Church and God. During the time he was emperor, though, his relationship with the Catholic Church was often not consistently a peaceful one. Even though in 1801, in a concordat with Pope Pius VII, Napoleon restored the Catholic Church to the religion of the great majority of the French citizens, and allowed seminaries, monasteries, and convents to be reestablished, and recognized the legitimacy of clerics who had not sworn allegiance to the French Constitution, he tried on numerous occasions to control the Church. In retaliation to Pope Pius VII's refusal to support the continental system with its embargoes against British trade, Napoleon forcefully annexed the Papal States. Pius VII responded by excommunicating Napoleon. Napoleon then, in turn, imprisoned the Pope. Napoleon also exhibited his willful disobedience to church authority by insisting on divorcing his validly married wife Josephine so as to marry Marie Louise of Austria. Nationalism and anti-Catholicism. As mentioned in a previous lecture, during the 100 Years' War between England and France, the feudal era, with its complex social space and its many overlapping allegiances, was gradually replaced by less complex, highly centralized nation-state, given definition by customs, common customs, language, borders, etc. In the 1880s, centralization and the consequent nationalistic fervor increased. This was expressed by centralizing political power, and in some countries, the continued practice of economic mercantilism, where trade was centrally controlled for the benefit of the nation in competition with other nations. Napoleon's continental system, with its embargo of British goods, and his insistence that other European countries, including the Papal States, follow suit, is a concrete example of mercantilism in practice. Soon, though, this economic form of mercantilism would be replaced by economic liberalism, where international trade is directed primarily by companies and not by competing nation-states. Napoleon, in accordance with mercantilism, wanted to eliminate England as a competitor to better establish France as the dominant nation-state that oversaw a vast European empire. He failed to accomplish his dream. His failure was followed by even greater centralization of power and an increase of nationalism across Europe. In their desire for ever greater control, nationalists at times wanted to control even the Catholic Church, whom they perceived as a threat to national identity and security. We will focus our attention on 3 examples of such anti-Catholic nationalism: German, Italian, and French. German nationalism. Otto von Bismarck, lived from 1815 to 1898, was a politician from Prussia who became Chancellor of the German Empire. He unified German states into a German empire with a specific national identity. One way he attempted to bring about a greater sense of national identity was by repressing the Catholic Church during his Kulturkampf, begun in 1871. The First Vatican Council I's definition of papal infallibility had been one influential factors that increased his desire to clamp down on the supposed threat he thought Catholics posed to the German national unity. During his struggle against Catholic culture, discriminatory laws were enacted and enforced in the German state of Prussia. Religious orders were expelled, Catholic clergy were prohibited to speak on political matters from the pulpit, many Catholic bishops were imprisoned or expelled from Prussia, and many parish priests also were imprisoned or exiled. In June of 1875, the Frankfurter newspaper reported that 241 clergy had been either imprisoned or fined. 1,000 rectories were now empty. Shortly afterwards, in 1876, all the bishops of Prussia were either in prison or in exile. Other anti-Catholic measures included the ending of state subsidies to the Catholic Church, the closure of some Catholic seminaries, and the tight state regulation of others, and the subjection of clergy appointments to state veto. Bismarck's persecution of the Catholic Church wound down around the turn of the century for two primary reasons. First, Catholics banded together to form the Centre Party to resist anti-Catholic measures in non-violent parliamentary ways. And second, Pope Leo XIII persuaded Bismarck to lessen his aggressive anti-Catholic stance. I'm going to read a little excerpt from Bismarck's 1871 pulpit law directed against the Catholic clergy. This is what it states. Any cleric or other minister of religion shall be punished with imprisonment or incarceration for up to 2 years if he, while exercising his occupation or having his occupation exercised, makes state affairs the subject of announcements or discussion in public before a crowd, or in a church, or before any number of people in some other place designated for religious gatherings in such a way that endangers the public peace. Italian nationalism. In 1796, the lands we now know as Italy were divided into the following states: Papal States, Kingdom of Sardinia, Republic of Venice, Republic of Genoa, Grand Duchy of Tuscany, and the Kingdom of Sicily. During the year of 1796, the above arrangement of states was changed when the French Revolutionary Army under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte invaded their lands. In 1805, Napoleon was crowned in Milan the King of Italy. In 1809, Napoleon annexed to France the Papal States. In 1814, Napoleon's land grabbing came to an end when he was finally defeated by a coalition of European powers and banished to the island of Elba. In 1814, the Congress of Vienna re-established the states according to their previous 1796 status. In the years following, a desire among many Italians for a unified Italy began steadily growing. Key leaders of this nationalistic movement included Giuseppe Mazzini, Count of Cavour, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and King Victor Emmanuel II. Giuseppe Mazzini put his literary skills and political activism at the service of promoting the union of Italian lands. The Count of Cavour aided the Italian unification efforts with his political leadership skills as Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia. King Victor Emmanuel II also helped Italian lands unite by giving the unification movement royal support. He consequently became the first king of a united Italy. And finally, General Giuseppe Garibaldi backed the unifiers with military power, thus greatly enabling them to be successful. So if you can see all these coming together, a person with great influence over media with his literary skills, a very experienced politician, an aristocrat, King Victor Emmanuel, and a general, all coming together, working together in the Italian unification movement. In 1861, after a number of battles, a unified Kingdom of Italy was announced, and Rome was declared its capital. There was one problem. The French garrison protecting the Pope was preventing the Italians from taking Rome. In 1870, however, this garrison was called back when France went to war with Russia. After a brief light skirmish on September 20th, 1870, Rome was captured and the Kingdom of Italy annexed what remained of the Papal States. The popes from September 20th, 1870 to February 11th, 1929 then became self-imposed prisoners of the Vatican. This 59-year imprisoned state of the papacy ended when the Vatican city-state was created in 1929 upon the signing of the Lateran Treaty on February 11th, 1929. This treaty was signed in the Lateran Palace by Benito Mussolini, Prime Minister and head of government for King Victor Emmanuel III, and by Pietro Cardinal Gaspari, the Vatican Cardinal Secretary of State for Pope Pius XI. French nationalism. Anti-Catholic nationalism returned to France with a vengeance, right at the time Italy was unified. If you recall, a French garrison left Rome in 1870 to fight in France's war with Prussia. This war concluded with France and its leader, Emperor Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon I, being defeated by Prussia. Emperor Napoleon III's Second French Empire was replaced by France's Third Republic. This democratic form of government lasted up until 1940, when the Nazis, during World War II, defeated France. During France's Third Republic, several anti-Catholic measures were enacted. In 1879, priests were prohibited from being on administrative committees of hospitals, and laywomen began replacing nuns in many hospitals. Also, in 1879, under the French Minister of Education, Jules Ferry, a bill on freedom of education was proposed. Article 7 of this bill was directed against religious, especially the Jesuits. It stated, I quote, "No person belonging to an unauthorized religious community is allowed to govern a public or private educational establishment of whatsoever order or to give instruction therein." End of quote. After the much debated Article 7 was rejected, but anti-Catholic sentiment was not. More anti-Catholic legislation was proposed and passed, including a law permitting divorce, a law ending military chaplaincies, the gradual removal of the Sisters of Mercy from hospital work, prohibiting Catholic universities from granting degrees, and requiring clergy to serve in the military. French anti-Catholic fervor increased when the former Catholic seminarian and Mason Émile Combes was elected as prime minister in 1902. His cabinet, not surprisingly, was almost entirely composed of Masons. Under his political leadership from 1902 to 1903, all parochial schools, around 12,000, were closed. 54 male religious congregations were dissolved, and 81 female congregations were prohibited. This was followed by a law that forbade the remaining congregations in France from teaching in any manner. In 1905, the law on the separation of the church and the state was passed. This law mandated the confiscation of all church property. In 1906, St. Pius X responded to the French law of 1905 with its strict separation of church and state by asserting, and I'm going to read this in its entirety because it's of great interest, that the state must be separated from the church is a thesis absolutely false, a most pernicious error, based as it is on the principle that the state must not recognize any religious cult. It is in the first place guilty of a great injustice to God, for the Creator of man is also the founder of human societies, and preserves their existence as he preserves our own. We owe him, therefore, not only a private cult, but a public and social worship to honor him. Besides, this thesis is an obvious negation of the supernatural order. It limits the action of the state to the pursuit of public prosperity during this life only, which is but the proximate object of political societies. And it occupies itself in no fashion, on the plea that this is foreign to it, with their ultimate object, which is man's eternal happiness after this short life shall have run its course. But as the present order of things is temporary and subordinated to the conquest of man's supreme and absolute welfare, it follows that the civil power must not only place no obstacle in the way of this conquest, but must aid us in effecting it. The same thesis also upsets the order providentially established by God in the world, which demands a harmonious agreement between the two societies, both of them, the civil and the religious society, although each exercises its own sphere, its authority over them. It follows necessarily that there are many things belonging to them in common, in which both societies must have relations with one another. Remove the agreement between church and state, and the result will be that from these common matters will spring the seeds of disputes, which will become acute on both sides. It will become more difficult to see where the truth lies, and great confusion is certain to arise. Finally, this thesis inflicts great injury on society itself, for it cannot either prosper or last long when due place is not left for religion, which is the supreme rule and the supreme mistress in all questions touching the rights and duties of men. Hence, the Roman pontiffs have never ceased, as circumstances required, to refute and condemn the doctrine of separation of church and state. And if it is true that any Christian state does something imminently and disastrous and reprehensible in separating itself from the church, how much more deplorable is it for that France, of all nations in the world, would have entered on this policy. France, which has been during the course of centuries the object of such great and special predilection on the part of the Apostolic See, whose fortunes and glories have ever been closely bound up with the practice of Christian virtue and respect for religion. Leo XIII had truly good reason to say, France can never forget that Providence has united its destiny with the Holy See by ties too strong and too old that she should ever wish to break them. And it is this union that has been the source of her real greatness and her purest glories. To disturb this traditional union would be to deprive the nation of part of her moral force and great influence in the world. End of quote. Metternich and the Concert of Europe. The Catholic Austrian Empire's Prince Clemens Wenzel von Metternich distrusted the various expressions of European nationalism. This is explained by his former position as ambassador for the Holy Roman Empire that was dissolved after it was defeated by Napoleon in 1806. As foreign minister of the Holy Roman Empire, Metternich had grown accustomed to the Holy Roman Empire's role of balancing competing power interests. As Chancellor of the Holy Roman Emperor's successor state, the Austrian Empire, Metternich worked towards restoring the traditional balance of power by checking nationalistic ambitions. He believed that if nationalistic aspirations were not moderated, then wars between competing nations were more likely to occur. As chair of the Congress of Vienna, Metternich took practically pro-monarchy steps to bring about this restoration to encourage a harmonious and I quote, concert of Europe. To ensure peace, he established boundaries, opposed both German and Italian unification efforts, and moderated Russian ambitions by including the Russian Empire in the Congress. The principal actors of the Congress of Vienna at first were the Austrian Empire, Prussia, Great Britain, and the Russian Empire. By signing a treaty on November 20th, 1815, these powers formed themselves into a quadruple alliance. Later, France was allowed into this alliance. Gradually, the common goal of peace that the great powers originally intended became overshadowed by the ever-growing rivalries among themselves. This tension led to a rupture, and two rival camps were formed. The Triple Alliance of the German Empire, under Prussian leadership in 1871, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, formed in 1867, and Italy versus the Entente powers of Britain, France, and the Russian Empire. During this tension, war broke out. World War I lasted from 1914, ended in 1918. And this war brought a decisive end to four empires: Austro-Hungarian, German, Ottoman, and Russian. I'm going to quote a little excerpt from Metternich's My Political Profession of Faith that well demonstrates Metternich's belief that monarchies, when united, help to bring about political stability. And I quote, "Let all the great monarchs come closer together and prove to the world that if they're united, it can only be beneficial, for union between them will assure the political peace of Europe. That they are only firmly united in order to maintain public order at a time when it is menaced on all sides. That the principles they profess are as paternal and as much intended for the protection of good citizens as they are repressive for dissident factions. Governments of lesser powers will see in such a projected union the anchor of their salvation and will hasten to associate themselves with it. Peoples will regain confidence and courage, and the deepest, most salutary pacification which the world has ever witnessed in all its long history could be established." God bless.